Cadence POV.
The evening skies had turned a beautiful orange, reminiscent of one of my favorite whiskeys back at the pack house. Thankfully, I had a bottle of the exquisite liquor here in the cabin. Not that I was in any position to drink, however, I couldn't sweat my grace just yet. Even if I was almost completely healed, I didn't want to risk my healing rate by staining my blood with alcohol. I was propped in a sitting position in my room. It looked better than the room I'd woken up in that morning. Better? The correct term was glorious. I was sitting on a king-sized bed in the middle of the room, long enough for the head of the bed to touch the wall and its foot to stand right in the center of the room. The color scheme was an ombre shade of white and olive, so were the curtains that hung open and swept to both sides of the window. Soft rays eluded the room from one open window, turning the once white room into an exotic shade of gold that now reminded me of the blonde-haired woman whose thoughts had begun to make my heart race. As if one cue, there was a soft rap on the door. It was pushed open, followed by a head the size of my palm peeking through the door. She stood upright before pushing the door wider and walking in with a first aid box in hand. Her hair was tied in a low ponytail, and for once she wasn't dressed in a dress. Instead, she had a pair of loose jeans hanging on her hips and a full-sleeved black top that fit for some reason. Shifting her weight from one foot to the other, she changed the position of the box from one hand and brought her eyes to give the deadest stare she could muster. "You asked for me to dress your wounds," she croaked out after clearing her throat. I tilted my head, squinting slightly. "I did. What's with the attitude?" I spat back in mild irritation, shifting to find a comfortable sitting position. I could have sworn I heard her scoff at that, but she still stood there with a straight face. Instead, she heaved a tired sigh and dragged her feet to the sides of the bed closest to me. She dropped the box beside her and dropped to her knees before glancing at me again. "I don't have an attitude, I just refuse to be a burden after you've saved my life and provided me with shelter. I'll clean up your wounds and be on my way. I shouldn't leave Declan alone for too long." She spoke again while reaching for some scissors to tear away the bandage. Carefully unwrapping it, I could see her eyes flicker at the raw wound staring her in the face. It was far from pretty, to be honest. It still hurt, but not so much that I would groan and yell at her to piss off. The marks of Dolph's claws were still fresh in comparison to the wound he'd inflicted. She reached for a liquid in the box and doused a cotton ball with it. Then she brought it to the wounds, rubbing at it gently. I couldn't help but be mesmerized by her rapt attention. A few strands of hair had found their way to block her vision, but she pushed them away quickly, returning her focus to tend to my wounds. Her forehead was now a brilliant orange under the natural rays. I trailed through to her lips that were shut firmly before she turned back to the first aid box. Carefully disposing of the used cotton balls, she reached for some ointment and pressed some onto her fingers. Her delicate fingers were so gentle, it was almost like she never touched my skin or she was afraid to touch it. They were feathery as they patted the ointment into the wound, and I found myself chuckling lightly. "You sure you don't want to become Annalise's assistant when we get back to the pack house? Perhaps I should promote you since you have excellent skills." I teased as she worked, still expecting a response from her. She shrugged instead and let out a painful smirk. "You give the orders, it's my job to follow suit." "So, you're giving me a reply now?" She didn't say anything, shifting her attention to applying more ointment. I continued to watch her work delicately until she'd finished applying it. Then she reached for a bandage wrap. "That day," I started and she froze immediately. Her fingers had tensed, but her eyes betrayed no emotion. "What about it? Why did you go out that day? We just arrived and you suddenly wanted to go out." "I just wanted some air," she answered dryly. "I wanted to clear my head, that's all. Aren't I permitted to do that much?" "Fair argument, but I don't believe you. You were trying to avoid me, and it's fucking obvious." My voice was low and less threatening than it would have been a month ago. She shook her head at that, muttering something inaudible under her breath. "No, I wasn't. It isn't even in my jurisdiction to avoid you." "Okay." The room fell back into a deafening quietness, eluded by soft breathing and birds chirping in the distance. And of course, bandages ripping as she stretched it across the length of one arm. She glanced at me, mouthing for me to sit upright. I did as she wanted and watched her wrap the new dressing over my wound, relief emanating from her being. I remembered her crying face all too quickly, and her expression that mirrored the one on her face now. That was a that day. Relief. As hazy as my memory from that day was, I could never mistake the current look on her face. Why did you cry that day if you weren't trying to avoid me? You're avoiding me because you're hurt, Larissa. I pointed out again, all of the taunting drained from my voice. She halted her movements, raising her head to look at me in what I assumed was surprise. I watched her eyes dart around and her hands lose coordination as they loosened their grip. Blinking quickly, she'd almost completely returned to that calm, irritating demeanor again, looking away from me. I could bet she was flustered, but her lack of response was stepping on my nerves in all the worst possible ways. I reached to her chin, pulling it a little harshly towards me. She let out a stifled yelp, wide-eyed. I stared at her eyes as gently as I could and watched hers do their utmost best to avoid mine. Look at me when I'm speaking to you, Larissa. Her name rolled out my tongue like velvet. Had it always felt this good to say her name? Do you realize how mad I was seeing you out there like that? They fucking put hands on you. What if they'd done something to you before I came? What if? I trailed off, forcing my throat clear. There was now a lump I hadn't realized has taken home in my larynx. She was still looking at me, but those warm chocolate irises had softened considerably. Just what if, Larissa? You make me worry about you, to the point where I want to risk my life for you. But if you keep giving me those dead eyes, you want me to believe that my actions were in vain? I continued, my voice growing thicker. She wasn't resisting, she was simply looking at me. I'd cupped her cheeks, my fingers slowly caressing and running along the length of her face. I did that because I know you're worried about me the way I am about you, Larissa. I continued, feeling the need to justify myself. I felt Peter leap around in agitation, whispering that I was doing a good job. I used to blame the stupid mating season for whatever it was that was going on between us, but it didn't make sense anymore. The mating season made you horny as fuck, not incredibly worried about how they were doing. The mating season would never make me jump in the face of death and tell it I didn't give a shit. It would never make me feel the way I was feeling about Larissa. It was odd yet familiar at the same time, and I wanted more. I no longer enjoyed the denial. It had gotten too exhausting to handle. What do you mean? She croaked out quietly, and if it was possible, the flicker in her eyes had amplified. I let out a soft sigh, my gaze unwavering however. If you're not, I want you to be worried about me. You already proved it to me that day. You called me there that day. You cried when you thought I was in mortal danger. What else do those mean? Stop. She finally snapped, pulling away from my grip. I saw a tear find its way away from her eyes, and she wiped at it so fast that I would have thought she was having a mental breakdown. Just stop, Caden. Her voice was broken and completely vulnerable. Even her once dead eyes that had softened were pleading and screaming at me. Please, I think I've been hurt enough. Isn't that what you want to hear? How much I love you and how you've made it so clear that you don't want me as your mate. Should I go ahead and tell you how much I've cried because of this back and forth? I've done nothing but be true to my feelings. Ever since we met. The tears had turned into a heavy fountain streaming down her eyes, and she did nothing to aid her hurt. I don't want to play your games anymore. I may mean nothing to you, but I'm a person too. Larissa, could you stop playing with my feelings? I don't find it funny. She snapped again, shooting up to her feet. Instinctively, I grabbed one of her wrists, pulling her back to where she'd been squatting to tend to my wounds. She was glaring at me now, but it did nothing to mask the hurt she had let herself feel and express today. Seeing her so unguarded like this was gut-wrenching. I could feel my chest tighten as I searched her eyes for something, anything that would reassure me that it would be okay. Maybe not now, but eventually. And who says I'm joking right now? I'm not joking, Larissa. I meant every word I said here. I forced myself to continue, and relished in watching her expression morph into one of pure surprise, then confusion. Her eyes fluttered erratically as they bounced around the room before returning to rest on my eyes. I saw another tear escape her eyes and trail down her reddened cheeks, and I wiped at it gently. Without thinking any further, I leaned it to kiss the spot I'd wiped it from. It was slightly salty where it should have been really salty. My best guess was that she must have been crying a lot. I'd made her cry so much. Caden, you're such an ass. I pulled away just enough to see her soft eyes before pulling her down on the bed with both arms and a shallow grunt. She didn't resist, she simply let me pull her till she was hovering over me. I let out a soft smile, something I'd hardly ever done to her, before leaning upwards to press my lips to hers. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about anything. I wasn't thinking of Amaya or Nick. I wasn't thinking of the woman who'd cheated on her husband and was sent on exile. I could only focus on the woman in front of me who was kissing me back with as much fire as she could muster. I could only think about the woman who'd cried 1,000 tears for my sake. I could only think about the woman who'd somehow managed to crawl her way into my heart, despite my firm decision never to fall in love with a cheat.
Caden's POV.
Caden. I heard Larissa whimper as I pulled her even closer and continued to kiss her despite every fiber of my being telling me to do the opposite. My heart was torn. One part of me struggled immensely to remind me that this was the woman who had done to someone what Amaya had done to me. But I could not help it. I could no longer resist her. I could no longer deny the fact that Larissa had a hold on me. She did things to me, things I could not put into words. She was my mate, and I was hers. It wasn't just about that, it was something deeper, and I was done trying to convince myself otherwise. Caden, I don't want to do this anymore. She whimpered again, her voice coming out in tiny whispers. The back and forth. 1 minute you seem like you genuinely want to kiss me, and then the next minute you're shoving me away like I'm trash. It hurts, okay? Her voice was higher now. It hurts us so much, you don't understand. I cupped her face in my palm. Shoo, I cooed. I know I've been cold and unreasonably mean to you and... No. Why you don't get it, Caden? Maybe this is nothing but a game to you. But to me it's more than that. I don't want to go through this. She choked on her tears. Helpless, I pulled her close and pressed my forehead against her, wishing there was a way to make her feel better. I felt her shake her head as if in resistance, and then she tried to speak through her tears, but her voice was much too muffled. A sharp pain tore at my heart at the sight of her still tearing up, and all I felt in that moment was guilt. Cold, hard guilt. She was hurting because of me. She had been crying because of me. But I had just been too dumb to realize, and too dense to care. Placing my hands gently around her shoulders, I cupped her face in her hands once more and gently raised her chin to make her face me. I wanted to look her in the eyes as I spoke. Larissa, I know I hurt you. It was heartless and unfair to keep blowing hot and cold when it comes to this, I said, gesturing between our bodies. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I don't want to be the reason why you cry like this, or the reason you feel like you're never enough. I pulled her even closer until our breaths were mingling in the right distance between us. I want you, Larissa. She let out a small gasp, raising her head to gaze at me through tear-stained eyelashes. I want you, I repeated. I have wanted you, every kiss, every touch, every time we were in close proximity. And I fought it. But I am done fighting it. I am done fighting the fact that I constantly think about you, constantly crave you. Her eyes glazed over, and I could feel the heat rush through my body and down my crotch. I want you. All of you. Whatever she was going to say was muffled by the motion of my lips capturing hers in a kiss. Her words melted into a gasp, and she wrapped her arms around my neck, pulling me impossibly closer. That did it for me. A hungry growl escaped me, and I grabbed her by the thighs and pulled her down to the bed so I was standing above her. I pulled away from the kiss and placed my tongue against her neck, taking in that powerful unholy scent that had been driving me insane from the moment we met. It wasn't enough. I wanted more. I needed more. Withdrawing myself a little, I let my fingers glide down her throat to her chest. When I hovered just above her breasts, she tensed, shivering noticeably. I was not sure if it was an excitement or revulsion, so I stopped to make sure she was okay with it. Don't stop. I heard her light whisper in my ear. Immediately, the last shred of self-control I had vanished into thin air. My fingers traced the fabric covering her breasts, and impatiently, I ripped through it. Her breasts spilled free, and for a moment, I was speechless. The only thing I was aware of was the motion of my dick hardening and stretching tightly through the fabric of my trousers. She was beautiful. Even more than I had envisioned. I swallowed at the sight of her creamy white mounds, round and full, complete with now swollen nipples. Fuck, you're perfect, I groaned, burying my head in her chest. Fuck. My dick throbbed painfully, but I held steady. Using my thumb, I stroked her exposed nipple, causing her to let out a moan that sent shocks through my body. Fuck. If I wasn't careful, she was going to make me release in my fucking shorts. And we had barely even started. You like that? I whispered in her ear, easing backward to watch her eyes roll back in ecstasy as I stroked her nipples which were hardening under my touch. Why yes, yes. She let out another moan, gripping tightly to my shirt and crossing her legs tightly. I thought my dick could not get any harder than it already was, but at that motion of hers, I nearly burst through my shorts. Grabbing her neck, I pulled her to me and trapped her lips between mine in a heated kiss.
Larissa's POV.
I roused in my sleep, twisting and turning in the unfamiliar bed. Not only was it unfamiliar, it felt stuffy beneath the sheets. They were heavy and pinned my body down to the bed, partially immobilizing my legs. Stretching uncomfortably across the length of the bed, I felt my legs hit something beneath the sheets. I let out an oblivious yawn before rolling over to my sides and fluttering my eyes open. And the sight in front of me was one of the most beautiful things I'd seen in my life. The alpha was lying beside me facing upwards, his eyes flipped shut in deep slumber. Light bounced off his skin like delicious hot chocolate milk, perhaps it was even better that he was still asleep. Seeing him up close when he wasn't speaking to me or dishing out others, I had to admit to myself the umpteenth time that he was the most beautiful man I'd ever seen. His tousled hair hung all over his face, and I reached out to push out some of the hair from his face to show some of the skin on his forehead. A small sigh escaped his lips, and I pulled away quickly, afraid that he would wake up. I wasn't ready to face him yet. Last night was something new, something different, and I was afraid of what he'd do to me when he woke up. Would he tell me to leave his bed like he'd always done? What even was last night? How on earth did I give in so easily to him? But then, his caresses were so soft, it would make anyone crumble in front of him. Get a grip of yourself, woman. I mentally face-bombed at my line of thought. What the hell was I even thinking? For all I knew, everything he said yesterday may have been a lie. If not, then this was some sick dream and I didn't want to wake up from it. I ran one hand through my hair to minimize the tangles that had formed in my hair from his grip last night. I found my mind drifting off to last night yet again, sweet tingles traveling down my spine till they settled down in my crotch. Only now did I feel the wave of soreness hit me like madness. I was beginning to rethink my choices now. I'd never slept with anyone before. I half hoped I hadn't thrown it all away for someone who was very fickle with his decisions. I propped myself up to rest my head weight on one elbow, watching as the light rays bounced off the skin and into his eyes that had begun fluttering now. Seeing that, I quickly turned to face the other side of the bed. The next thing I felt was an arm finding its way around my waist and pulling me into a spoon. I let out a soft gasp in surprise, fisting both hands that served me as a makeshift pillow. His breathing against my skin felt ticklish, sending goosebumps all over. Why was he even in such close proximity? Even when I tried to wriggle myself out his grip, it simply tightened. Tired, I gave up and closed my eyes. This was a dream, of course. There was no way in hell that there was a real grip around me, let alone this tight. You done squirming around? You are interrupting my sleep, Larissa. He finally mumbled against my skin and I froze in place. He was awake all along. And for some reason, I liked the sound of his voice this morning. It was deep and raspy, and something about it sent heat coursing through my bones. I nodded in return like an idiot, unable to say anything. The words had gotten stuck at the back of my throat and I was afraid that I'd sound flustered. Not here, not now. Not in front of him. Machem, he grunted again and loosened his grip. Turn around and look at me. I want to see what you look like in the mornings, and keep it with me. Sorry, what? Turn around. He groaned a little impatiently, physically pulling me as if that would automatically flip me around. Alpha's orders. I felt a small chuckle escape my lips and I turned around to meet his eyes closed again. Were his eyelashes always this long and beautiful? There were also small freckles littered on his face. How had I never noticed them? They must not be visible except from up close. You seem to enjoy staring at my face. Mesmerized much? There was teasing in his voice, but gentle teasing. I felt heat rush to my cheeks at his words and ducked away, face-palming in embarrassment. He stretched, small noises leaving his lips, before he returned to holding me. His grip was loose now, just hanging there idly. Look at me. He continued with a rasp and brought his free hand to my chin. Clearing my throat gently, I pulled my hands away and did as he instructed. Maybe I shouldn't have, because damn it, I could swear there was now an orange band between his emerald irises and chrome silver rings. He was illegal, those eyes were illegal. Did you sleep well? That's good then. He replied with a soft snort and wrapped both arms around me. For a minute it was as though he'd fallen back into his sleep. But he soon roused again, and his eyes were open. About last night. Oh shit, no. Subconsciously I gripped the sheets, preparing myself for the worst. The absolute worst he could do to me right now was to ask me to leave. And leave I would, but I'd be the most broken I'll ever be. You don't have to be so tense, Larissa. I'm not going to bite you. All I wanted to say was that about last night, I had no idea that you were a virgin. He stated as if it was the most obvious thing in the world, letting out a low rumble before returning to look at me. His eyes were wide in what looked like childlike wonder, something that I'd never seen before. It caught me off guard. Yes. I'd never slept with anyone before. I started, my voice losing its volume as it proceeded. Never got the chance to. That's odd then. Not even your husband, ex-husband? I felt my eyes widen at that. How did he know about Stefan? I'd never mentioned him since I came, I made sure of it. He must have noticed it too, as all the wonder had drained from his eyes. How did you find out about him? I half choked out in confusion. You didn't expect that I'd let a total stranger waltz into my pack just like that, did you? He chuckled and stretched again beneath the sheets, deliberately entangling our bare legs. He looked at me for a brief second and let out a sigh. I had Jackson do some digging about you. Larissa Token Moon, former Luna of the Token Moon pack who was divorced and rejected by her mate on accounts of cheating. I no longer want to use or be addressed by that name. It's like bile in my throat. I answered sharply, feeling my throat tighten at the mention of that pack I'd made up my mind to rid from my memory. With a bitter laugh, memories of that day came rushing in like uncontrollable tides. That's what Stefan wanted everyone to think. In reality, it was far from the truth. He cocked a brow in question, and I was more than willing to clear his confusion. I thought I was getting married to the loveliest man in the world, a man who would love me, one with whom I would rule the pack with fairness and justice. If I'd known what awaited me after my wedding night, I never would have gotten married. I forced out with a bitter smile, taking in his micro-expression. His eyes were trained on mine, only moving to my forehead and back. On the night of my wedding, he called me a whore, showing me pictures of me with several different men. How had he even believed that? The sight was disgusting. Pictures? Photoshopped. Katya. She's my stepsister. I sniffled after that, gently wiping at my eyes. He also reached out to wipe them. I didn't want to continue, but I'd come so far already. My wedding night would forever be a day I wish could disappear. He slept with Katya that night, right in front of me, as though she was the one who'd gotten married, and I was reduced to a spectator. He did that to you? There was disbelief in his voice. That was only the beginning. I let out another painful chuckle. The next 2 years were hell, simply put. I was a servant in my own house, but I had to pretend for my parents and the entire pack. It hurt like hell to have no one to tell about my struggles. Until one day Stefan had decided that he was tired of the charade and wanted a divorce. Of course, it wouldn't be a worthy rejection if he didn't make a huge deal out of it and publicly reject me as his mate in front of my family and the whole pack for cheating. Where I come from, a rejection like that ends in slavery. At this point, I could see the alpha seething in silence. He glanced down at me, running his fingers gently through my hair before bringing them to wipe at my eyes. He's a bastard, through and through. He said through gritted teeth, caressing my tear-stained cheeks. For the first time I saw compassion in the way he looked at me. And to think that was the reason I wanted nothing to do with you. Do you know why I needed a housekeeper even when I have a lot of servants at my disposal? You've never asked me once. He asked again, eyes softened. I shook my head, biting back to snicker. I don't think it was in my place to ask. You must have heard the rumors at least. My pack members aren't exactly scared of death. What do you mean? He let out a harsh sigh and pulled his arms away, resting both arms on the blankets covering his lower torso. Before now, I used to be married. He chuckled again and turned to look at the ceiling like it was the most important thing in the world. Amaya? You must have heard her name once or twice. I heard she died, but her name was forbidden from being mentioned. Died? I would be overjoyed if that was the case. Wasn't she your wife? I wouldn't regard the woman who abandoned my son in the middle of a battle just to satisfy her fantasies, my wife. I looked up at him in confusion, and a sudden realization set in. Gwen's words that day, my eyes widened in slight horror, and his scoff was more than enough confirmation. She cheated, broke my heart, and left my son and me. I'd kill her if I ever found her. He finished with a sadness in his eyes, the most painful kind that I'd only ever seen in the face of betrayal or death. He must have loved her so much, it must have killed him inside when she'd betrayed him like that. You loved her, didn't you? I piped lowly, knowing the answer already. He shook his head, however, and finally turned to look at me with a small smile playing on his lips. Once upon a time, I swore to give her the world. But there's someone else whom I'd rather have the world with. He answered before reaching for my forehead and planting a soft kiss on it. Second chances are non-existent to me. Even I didn't deserve a second chance. But I finally got lucky once. My second chance is right here in front of me, and I'd no longer be in denial. You have no idea what you put me through. I fought back some tears that had made their way out of their haven. I was feeling so many emotions at once. On one hand, I felt overjoyed that he felt like I did, but I felt more relief than happiness. On the other hand, I loved him so much that I hated him for everything. I understood his hurt, however. We fell down the rabbit hole with our mates and met horrible fates. But he had me now. He had someone who would remain by his side in the face of death. I'm sorry, Larissa. He cooed gently, pulling me into a warm embrace. Warm not from the warmth of his bare chest, but warmth emanating from all of the bottled-up feeling for so long already. His scent was calming, a freshness that was intoxicating to no end. Please let me love you, Alpha. I choked out against his chest, sniffling as I spoke. I will stand by you no matter what, even with a claw to my eyes. I'm sorry. He spoke again, pulling me away to create just enough space for his big hands to cup my cheeks. His eyes had a twinkle, one that has been so evident since last night as he searched my eyes for something. And he pressed his lips to mine, kissing me tenderly.